So Sam, I really want to
No,
know.
I was gonna ask that question.
Okay, go.
Do you renegotiate deals that you're already making money on?
Yes.
Why?
It's a long story. It's a long story, and we have a long way to go.
Okay.
But how do you feel about the industry in general with renegotiating? Because I feel like there's a lot of undercover renegotiators that are afraid to
So
talk about it.
let's talk about what renegotiation even means. Because so we're talking about real estate deals
Mm-hmm.
that get renegotiated
Mm-hmm.
and that they're being bought as an investment property, and you've already agreed on a certain price point with the seller, and
Mm-hmm.
you're going back to the seller to renegotiate that price point, right?
Okay.
Okay. So
Wait, it's more than that, right? Well, there's probably two sides of that coin. Um, so you have a deal, and let's give an example, right? That you're having a contract with the seller for 150,000.
mhm,
You might have sold it for 180,000, so you're already making a profit.
right.
And then there's an option to renegotiate it to try to make
What does it
a
mean
little
that
bit
you've
more
sold it? Did
profit.
you sell the house?
That you sold the contract.
Right. So you
It's the
acquired,
deal. You sold the
correct.
deal.
So you acquired a contract to purchase a property for 150, and you found somebody who's willing to pay 180
80
for the same property
for the same property inside
s-
of the same deal.
inside of the same deal, and
So
they're just going to buy the contract from you for $30,000.
correct.
Now you have the option to go back to the seller and try to lower that 150,000 down to, let's say, 130,000.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, instead of 30,000, you would be making $50,000
Correct.
because your new purchase price is 130,000.
Correct.
So now your profit margin almost doubles
Correct.
with that renegotiation.
Okay.
So
So
go ahead.
so what I was gonna ask is, so I started talking about the industry. So we're given the example.
Yeah.
So the two examples is that's kind of an elective way that increases the amount of income that a company can get. And in very many cases, if not all, it's based off of new information. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no.
Okay, because it has to be justified, doesn't it?
It has to be justified.
Okay.
Uh,
So, because the other example I was going to give is if you have it under contract for 150,000 and the highest price you can get is 150,000 for the contract or even less. Now you have to renegotiate it to even make the deal work.
yeah, so there's a
So it's like
difference,
an
right?
elective way and then a way where it's kind of required in order to make the
Correct.
deal work.
So either it's optional where you basically are making money already and you just want to make more, and the other way is
Why do you smile?
and the other way is if you're not making money and you have to renegotiate so you can make money on that transaction.
Are you evil?
Am I evil?
Are you evil? Do you think you're evil or do you think you're a great person? Genuinely.
I think I'm kind.
Okay.
I think I'm genuinely a kind person.
So why do you smile so big when you say you're making 30,000 and you renegotiate to almost double your fee?
Don't you smile when you make more money?
Yeah, yeah. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's funny because it's an uncomfortable situation to talk about.
Okay.
And it's almost like because essentially you did a light post recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
What group was that in?
It was Pace Morby's group.
You did and it was just a very light post where you said,
I said, do you renegotiate your deals if you're already making money on it?
correct, correct. You didn't say whether you should, whether you shouldn't. You didn't fight for it or against it. You kind of just asked about it,
Yeah.
right? And lots of posts, even deal posts, don't get tons of comments or likes or whatever, and sometimes they get a little bit to neutral amounts of likes, and that one had a lot of comments.
Right.
But why did it have so many comments?
People had a lot of hate for me.
Maybe.
Most people
It's
said
almost like they did direct the hate for you. It was passive aggressive.
it was all directed to me. People said mostly that that's greedy, that's unethical. Um, you're not allowed to do that. You are taking advantage of the sellers, and if you're already making money, leave it alone.
Mhm.
So mostly it was just comments in those
So
nature.
if there's 50 comments, how many were against renegotiating?
90%.
Probably at least 90, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now there were a few that were for it. Like
Yes.
one guy blatantly said every damn time.
He said always.
Always. 100%.
And
Yep.
you said, when I opened the picture of that guy, what did you say?
I don't remember. What did I say?
I opened and showed you a picture of him.
Uh-huh.
Oh, let me pull him up. And then,
And see if I remember what I said.
yeah. Because I want you to say it
I
in
would
the,
love to say it,
in the
whatever
exact
it is.
same way that you said it.
You got to remember though, I'm a 45-year-old dude, and memory's not quite there. It's definitely a renegotiator. Undercover. That's exactly how a renegotiator looks.
You said this is a slick motherfucker.
Oh. So, you want to show it?
I'm not showing the picture. I don't expose people.
It's basically a dude that looks innocent
Yeah.
in a way.
But you said you would hire him and you would let him work in your company, but you wouldn't leave him alone with your family or with your wife.
Yes, yes.
Why?
Because he'll get the job done. No, at the end of the day, obviously we talk outlandishly a lot, right? Because
Uh-huh.
either there's truth in a lot of these things, right?
Uh-huh.
But it's also fun, right? I
Yeah.
like shock comedy. I like saying things that just like makes people think twice and even think if I'm being honest or not, because it's fun and it's funny to me. So that type of dude, he's a clean cut guy, tucked in shirt, everything's iron neat pressed, clean shaven head, but he has this squint in
You
his
mean a guy like you?
close to me, but there's a squint in his eye and there's a little dark shade over his face and he has this big questionable mustache.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, I know what he's up to. I
Okay.
know exactly what that guy's up to.
Yeah.
He's hired.
Well, he's and you also said you'd hire him without an interview.
Correct. He's starting tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'll start tomorrow. He doesn't even know, but he got the job.
So why do you think most people don't perceive it as negotiating after you're already making money or renegotiating after you're already making money on the deal as something that's ethical or not greedy?
Well, I want to answer that question with a question, if
Okay.
that's cool. Okay. Sometimes it's really difficult for me to understand why that's different than a regular retail transaction,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because in very many cases, when I've listed my own properties, maybe they're flips, maybe they're investment properties or whether on the MLS, there's people that are not hesitant to put it under a contract only to renegotiate later,
Okay.
right? So they can lock it up so no one else has the opportunity to bid,
Okay.
right? So that's one thing that's out there. And on the same
Is
token,
that also unethical though?
is it unethical? I don't think it's unethical, no.
Okay.
I think it's technically like if they didn't have true intention to buy it at that price and we knew they didn't have true intention, I don't think we'll ever know. I don't think anyone would ever admit that. But it's technically not
So
unethical.
you're saying it's okay to renegotiate deals that are off-market deals, say it's wholesale deals, because it's the same thing as retail transactions,
Well,
because a lot of people lock up houses and then they go and renegotiate after the inspection period or within the inspection period?
well, there was another example I was going to give, right? So that's one thing, but also even on traditional retail transactions, right? A realtor goes in with a family and they put an offer in on a house. They go through the inspection period, right? They find things out on the inspection, and then the realtor says, "Oh, we got this, this, and this, and this. I'm going to go to bat for you. I'm going to ask them to repair all this, or I'm going to ask for a credit." Even if, because we've been through it a lot of times, even if the house is listed at a price based on its condition and told to the realtor, I'm listing at this because of its general condition. We really don't want to go into repairs or any credits. Is this a number that would work for you? Yes, it should work. They still go through the inspection period and they still ask for repairs or a credit after the fact.
Right.
So is that unethical?
I don't think any of it is unethical.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't think it's unethical, and it could be based off of new information found on the inspection,
So
right?
you're
So
saying
if the
it's
wholesale,
based off of new
right,
information
right,
at all times,
right. Is it always at all times based on new information for the retail side or the wholesale side or any side?
any side.
Um,
And what's new
yes,
information? It's just the
yes,
house needs more repairs in most cases.
correct. Probably in all cases.
I don't think
There
so.
could be circumstances that are against a certain value. I mean, maybe we can think of some.
Well, I'll give you an example. So we've had a transaction with a very unique lady who slept in her garage with her dog, and
Okay.
her dog was using the house as a restroom.
Oh my God. Can
Um,
you explain that part?
well,
If
before I explain that part, so
that's a good interlude.
that transaction, she kept saying that she needed to stay at the house after closing, which, was pre-negotiated initially. It got renegotiated later on because the purchaser of that property wasn't comfortable. The person who we were going to assign that deal wasn't comfortable allowing that person to stay for as long, right? And that was the only person who could actually buy that deal. And they weren't comfortable to let her stay for that long. So that had to be renegotiated. It did get renegotiated. And she agreed to that. And then we proposed to her that we would actually pay for her hotel for 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
And she agreed to that as well, right? So it's not always a monetary negotiation. Sometimes it's terms that get renegotiated.
Okay.
So she agreed to that. And then she came back and she said she actually doesn't want it and she wants to continue to stay in her garage so she can get her belongings,
Mm-hmm.
right? And she wanted the same period of time after already agreeing to the hotel for the second time.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually, what ended up happening was she simply tried to renegotiate us
Mm-hmm.
from what we had initially agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of cases, it's not just the price, it's also the terms and the conditions
Situation.
of that agreement.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So it's not always the repairs.
Right.
Because sometimes you could negotiate for that person, for example, to stay less, and then the buyer pays a little more,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
right? Other instances could be something like somebody needs to close sooner. Like they have a house that they're buying, and initially we had pre-agreed to close on, a particular date. Um, or, we've agreed to close on a particular date, but they're not buying a house, but they need money for
Mm-hmm.
something that came
Mm-hmm.
up, like the transaction that we have in Birmingham.
Yep.
The gentleman needs money because he's 3 months behind on his retirement facility and he's behind on his cell phone bill, on his utilities bill, on every kind of bill that you could possibly
Yep.
imagine.
Yep.
So could you go and renegotiate that transaction based on the fact that, hey, I'm going to have to close this sooner, even though we've
That
pre-agreed to close later?
that would be tough. That would be tough. So it's something that people do, even end buyers at all levels, where I could probably see if you had to tell a realtor, push for this, and the end buyer what doesn't want to, or the realtor says that it's uncomfortable for them, it can be proactively offered from the seller, or the end buyer can say, due to the inconvenience, we would want a reduction.
Exactly. So
Right.
is that out of the
So
question
what
that you could
are
get a
you
reduction?
asking in a reverse manner, is it okay to do it that way also?
Right. No, I'm not saying is it okay. I'm just saying that's not based on new information about repairs. That's a completely separate issue.
Mm-hmm.
And there could be hundreds of issues like that could
Sure.
come up throughout the transaction.
Sure. Sure.
So it can't always, it's not always the repairs on the property. Would you
Mm-hmm.
agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would totally agree with that. But it feels like it's always based on new information.
So you kind of said it right that it usually is based off of new information. However, the question I have for you is, could it be, so let's say you receive new information
Mm-hmm.
and you're the person in the middle, so you're assigned in the contract, and the same information was received by the end buyer. And the end buyer doesn't want anything in return. They're still good to go with the deal the way it was pre-agreed on initially. But you still have that new information in your hands now. So you go and renegotiate based on that new information.
I think the window is open,
What does that mean?
that it's optional.
Okay.
I don't think it's out of the realm because essentially you agreed upon a certain number with the seller. Smiling.
Uh-huh.
So you agreed upon a certain number with the seller based on that conversation. You're buying a property as is at
Yeah.
a certain number based on the conversation.
Yes.
And it's really tough because it's almost always a lot worse,
Okay.
right? And when it's a lot worse, you put yourself at risk of not even being able to transact a deal when you have the intention to transact that deal.
Right. So I'm not gonna say the address or the name,
Okay.
but on a recent deal that we got, we did a full inspection on the house,
Okay.
and it wasn't a lot worse. And I think you know what deal I'm talking about.
I think continue.
Okay. And you went for a large reduction, despite the fact that it was not a lot worse than what we anticipated. It was actually better.
Is this in St. Augustine?
Yes.
Okay. It was a lot worse.
How?
There were major things. So would you agree?
So major things
Let
is
me ask you
different.
this.
Hold on.
Can
Major.
I need to be able to interlude, okay? Because
Okay.
the house had a roof that was replaced 10 years ago,
Yeah.
but it also needed replacing right now, pretty much after we found out about the inspection report.
I mean,
That's
are you
if
going to
that's
replace
not
the roof?
major, huh?
Are you going to, you heard
It's
me.
going it's very likely, would you agree, it's very likely to come up when we sell it? Because we haven't sold the deal yet.
Potentially. That
It's
still
very
doesn't
like
justify the amount of reduction.
I think it does.
How much does a roof cost?
Depends on the roof.
I mean, how much would an expensive roof cost?
An expensive roof and so an expensive roof in a high traffic vacation destination is expensive.
Okay, how much?
I mean, it could be 30 grand.
Okay, and how much did you ask?
Well, that's not all that.
No, hold on. How much did you ask?
So you want me to say a number based on not enough information?
Yes.
60,000.
Okay. By the way, the roof does not cost $30,000.
No, 20. It could be 20. Listen, there are so the roofing prices, I'm sure you would agree, are all over the place, or can be all over the place. So there's a roofing company, I can't even remember the name. I would say it if I can remember it. They talk about they are a white glove service roofing company. Their
Is
costs are
that the roofing
double,
company you
or
use?
their cost. I would use them.
What?
I would use a company
You
like
would
that.
use a company
I
like
would
that
pay
and
for
pay them
service.
$20,000.
I would pay for great service.
No, $20,000, not for great service.
Listen, I'm giving an extreme example.
Okay.
Right? You're gonna give an extreme
That's Mac
circumstance.
Williams.
I'm gonna give it. You want to answer that really quickly?
All right.
You have a new lead. Press any key.
I think that's Mac.
Oh, it's not Mac.
Hello, this is Sam.
Yes, you're trying to phone call?
Oh yeah, I was probably calling about your property that you had submitted to us as an inquiry. I'm actually outside of my office right now. I'm walking in 20 minutes. Would that be okay for me to call you back? Okay, perfect. As soon as I walk into the door, I'll give you a call back. And is this Ed? Ryan, got it. Okay, Ryan, perfect. I'll give you a call back. You got it. Bye-bye.
Okay. It looked like Mac. It was 706.
706.
Gotcha. All right. So it's an arguable circumstance, right?
Right.
On top of that, the new part of the new information also was very low amperage on the electrical box. We assumed 150 or so.
So a lot of other things came up.
I have to be able to finish my sentences.
All right.
Okay. So a lot of other things did come up. So it was 100 amps which is not really, can you get by? Yes, but it's not really acceptable in today's terms. A lot of double tapped
Breakers.
breakers, which is a huge no-no. Even the ground
Was
was
shot.
charred,
Yeah.
which is a huge no-no. So there's a lot of things that have to be replaced, and then new breakage from amperage from JEA that has to be brought into the house, an entirely new redesigned panel. So that's another
Understood.
circumstance, and a handful of other things. Also, what would have benefited them is being able to leave all of their debris behind.
So you didn't just renegotiate the deal, you also gave them more favorable terms.
By terms, you mean leaving their debris behind?
Leaving debris behind and staying at the property for longer periods of time.
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
So there were a handful, and there might even be one other major thing that I can't recall as far as conditional changes that weren't talked about in the beginning. And then we gave them 2 months, right?
Correct.
2 months to live there for
Rent
rent-free
free.
with no escrow holdback, which is a risk, right? And we're borrowing private money at a discounted rate, you know, from a friend, so he's at risk too. So that's a level of risk
Right.
until we sell the place.
Right. So what you're saying is
And it was a light renegotiation because it wasn't, not that it's a light number, a $60,000 renegotiation is not a light number, but it was essentially kind of like just asked for. So it's like we have these new things going on. We didn't see that initially, asked for the number, and it was agreed upon because it made sense to her. Are you measuring her height?
so
So I don't know, man. Like, I think it's all very, very justifiable because honestly speaking, I think we know we're going to make good money on this deal, but we honestly don't know what we're up against on the back end and what's going to be exposed
sure,
when we
it's
go to
not a
sell it.
closed deal yet, and obviously you're still taking a huge risk.
Right, right. So I genuinely do feel that way, and I do have that underlying worry. I feel like we know we're going to make good money on it, but I'm also, until a real estate deal is closed,
Until the
it's
money
never
is in your
fully
account.
closed.
Yeah,
Correct.
correct.
And we have a couple of certainties right now that, well, a couple of perceived certainties that are now on edge that we're
Right.
trying to close.
So what I was gonna lead to is essentially most deals, even if you're making money, and let's say there is new information, but let's say you're still making money even with new information, and so you underwrote the deal as if you were gonna make $20,000 on it,
Mhm.
right? And you go into a transaction and you are able to secure a $20,000 profit, right? Now it's never guaranteed, of course, because it still has to go to the closing table, all parties have to sign, it has to fund, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
But paperwork wise, let's say you've secured a profit of $20,000 on the deal, and that's what you intended to make initially,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'll even go a step further. Let's say you intended to make 20, but you're actually making $23,000 on the transaction.
Okay.
However, there is certain new information that came up, and now you have the option to go back and renegotiate the transaction. I'll give you a more specific scenario. You have got to the point where you've received a payoff, because most deals have mortgages on it. Most houses have mortgages on it when we're buying them. And the mortgage has to be paid off, and the mortgage amount is $100,000. And you're giving the seller $130,000, so the seller is walking away with 30, and you're making 23 on top of the 30. So you sold the deal for 153, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you have the option to go back and potentially reduce that 30 closer to the mortgage payoff, and then the seller walks away with less money. Your actions and
What's
how
the
would
new
you?
information?
There is just so there was an inspection report done by the buyer, and he shared the inspection report,
Mm-hmm.
and the buyer is not asking for any credits, but the inspection does have certain things, because inspections usually look very scary. every house, even brand new constructions, the inspections look scary, and the inspectors blow things out of the proportion, and they put safety concerns and stuff like that. But you have a savvy buyer, and they read through all that, language, and they're not worried about the items that are on the inspection. However, those items are there, such as misconnected ducts on the AC, or I don't know, a filled gutter with the gutter is filled with debris, or discoloration on the outside of the house, or
Okay.
one window is fogging,
Okay.
things like that.
So there's two things that immediately come to mind when you talk about that. The first thing is I like to go back and think, would that have completely changed my conversation on the front end? And what type of risk would I have been in had that affected the situation, right? Because that is going to happen where it affects, in almost all cases, it's going to affect future situations, or it will affect situations in general. If a buyer gave a pass because we either had an unsavvy buyer or a buyer that can get things done cheap or whatever, I still think we have a responsibility as a company to discuss that stuff, because there's going to be several other circumstances where a deal will fall apart because of the new information, or not even get locked up because we learned that information early on and we're trying to get it at the right number.
So you're giving me an answer, but you're not giving me an answer. So I understand where you're
What?
leaning towards, but you're not giving me an answer as to, do you go back to the seller and ask for a price reduction based on those items, or based on that new information?
So the second part that I was going to talk about, which is a circumstance, is I honestly do care what the seller's plans are afterward,
Okay.
right? So what does the seller use? And this is a very common thing in all facets of real estate, especially in wholesaling, is like, when you get your money, what are your plans for that? Because that helps us decide whether they need a lot of cash right now, or if they can finance some of it over time, or where we can potentially be, because obviously we're in this business to make money.
Right.
And I'm sure you would agree with that. So that also plays a fact into it. Like if they are closing on a mobile home for 24, 25 grand, it may not warrant a renegotiation. But if they're not, and they're going to go live with their mother and they're getting $30,000 cash, I think there's a discussion to be had based off of new information.
So basically, you're saying if they don't need the money for something specific, then it's worth renegotiating. But if they're going to use the money for something specific after this transaction, then you will try to go for the renegotiation.
Yes, I'm going to just say yes.
Okay. Because most sellers that we deal with are probably under some form of distress situation, right? So most of them are going through something, and they don't want to sell. They have to sell this property that they have in order to, move on. And they really have no choice. So if you're under contract, and let's pretend there's a situation where there's going to be a foreclosure. The seller's behind on payments, and they're going to get foreclosed on by the bank, right? And basically, you're at the point where, well, you know that they could probably make it work with $20,000, but they really wanted to get 30 so that they could have some living expenses. And obviously, it's not your fault that the seller is in that situation, right? However, they are in that position, and you're basically their only solution.
Okay.
You've secured a buyer that's going to close on the property to avoid the auction and the foreclosure. They really don't have time to list the property, and they don't have time to waste time with any other cash buyer. They just have to close, right? And in the back of your mind, you know that they would take 20 and not 30. So is that unethical to ask for that price reduction and try to get that price reduction?
And what's the new information?
So same thing. I mean, those small items that came up on the inspection.
So, and then we're making profit?
23,000.
So we're making 23,000. And what do they need the money
The
for?
seller needs $20,000 to buy a mobile home,
Okay.
but they really want 30 so they can also have living expenses.
I think it's the exact same question, right? I think it's new information warrants the discussion.
So yes.
It's the exact same answer.
Yeah. Okay.
You need to hear the word yes.
I need to get a yes or a no, and not a political answer.
So I want to turn the tables a little bit here.
Okay.
Okay. Because we had a scenario where we had a property. It was a nice property. It was in Venus, Texas.
Mhm.
And it was a novation, right?
Mhm.
And we sold it to a retail buyer. And when the HUDs came out, or when the title search was complete, it turned out we were making, I think, we intended to make around $45,000 to $50,000, or maybe even more at some point. But the title search revealed a lien. Oh no, let me see. Okay, the title search revealed a lien for about $30,000.
Okay.
The underlying seller wasn't aware of that lien,
Mhm.
right? The seller had already put like an additional $15,000 or $20,000 in the property for repairs while we were getting ready to put it on the market so that we can sell it. We could have gone to close. We could have gotten $15,000. We could have taken care of that lien he didn't know about because we had room in his fee. And he was already taking losses, but he would have taken just whatever small losses because he wanted to get out of the property. He wanted to get out of his situation,
Mhm.
right? So can you explain to us what happened?
Yeah, so basically the seller had purchased that property without title insurance, right? And he had a few really large mistakes that he had made when he purchased that property. Outside of not buying it with title insurance, he also, purchased it subject to and transferred it into his personal name. And the issue with that transaction was really those mistakes that he has made along the way. So he got himself in that situation where not only he purchased the property incorrectly or with an incorrect structure, but he also didn't get title insurance on a property that could potentially have more liens than he was taking over. Right? So there's really not a lot of people he can go back to and try to cure that situation because the old seller is not going to do anything about it. Although that would have been the right chain of events, right? He would have to go back to the old seller, but he just didn't have any time for it. So when time came to actually close on the transaction and we facilitated that close for him, we've underwrote the transaction where, without us having that knowledge of that lien, where he would make $12,000. So when the transaction happened and that lien popped up, and it was a $43,000 lien, essentially we've done all the work and we've done all the marketing and we've done everything on our part so that we could make the fee that we initially went into the transaction trying to make. And we've also, exhausted our resources, our time, our marketing efforts, and that deal may have gotten some more priority than other deals that we have had because of the.
So the 12,000 that he would have made, would he make that, or he would just get reimbursed for repairs?
He would get reimbursed. Well, a portion of it would have reimbursed him for repairs, and a portion of him would go to pay for some of the money that he sunk into the property.
Okay.
Like closing costs and acquisition.
So he would have broken even, or he would have.
He would have still lost money.
Okay.
Right, but in this case, not only after that lien popped up, not only he was losing that $12,000, but he also had to bring a little over $30,000 to the closing table. Right now, it's not my fault that I didn't get title insurance, and it's not my fault that I didn't structure the transaction correctly.
Correct.
Because everything that was up to me was performed as per, the initial agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through and we went back to the seller and we proposed to him to make that happen. And we said, we still are able to close and you're still going to avoid the foreclosure and you're still going to avoid everything that comes with this transaction that you got yourself into. But you have to bring another $30,000 to the closing table. Now, whether he didn't put that, directly into the property, however, he needs that so that he could sell it, and that was the underlying agreement.
Okay.
So that's why he brought the money to the closing table.
So I appreciate that political answer also.
Okay.
So my question is, if you have a potential $45,000 fee, and then inside of that fee, the $30,000 loan can be absorbed, and you still make $15,000 where he doesn't have to bring more to the table. Is it ethical to ask him to bring it to the table rather than having to
Yes.
sacrifice it
It's
to make it easier on him and for us to still make $15,000?
it's ethical because it was the initial agreement.
Okay, fair enough. I'm not saying it's not ethical, but that's my question.
Right.
So is that a form of renegotiation? Probably not really,
I
right?
don't think it's a renegotiation. I think that's bringing the initial terms back in place.
Mm-hmm.
Because renegotiation would have been, increasing the purchase price for the underlying contract,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then that's like saying, you hire a realtor, right? If you had hired a realtor and you went to sell your property and you can't sell your property because you can't pay the realtor commissions,
Mm-hmm.
right? You still owe them the commissions
Mm-hmm.
for their service.
Right.
Or you hire a contractor, they start a job, they open up the walls, and then, there's something to take, there's mold behind the walls.
Right.
Now, do you not pay for, remediating the mold? You have to.
Of course.
Otherwise, the contractor can't finish the job.
Of course. So it's new information. Is that accurate?
It's new information, but I feel like it's new information that was just not uncovered.
That's all that's what new information is.
Right.
Okay.
I guess.
Okay. So let me ask you this. When you made that post about lightly asking about renegotiating, why was everyone so worked up? Because it had more comments than a typical post, or at least one of our typical posts.
Correct.
And then one thing that was also weird, there was a comment in there where someone had it, like, basically he said, I try to make $20,000 on my deals. If I don't make it, I'll try to renegotiate to at least get up to that. And if I make that or more, I don't go back in for a renegotiation. That's a little bit weird. So why was it so
Well,
viral? Why
it
were so
goes
many people worked up?
it goes back to my original question. If you intended to make 20 and you're making 20, do you renegotiate the deal even if you have the new information, right? And the answer was yes, because you have the new information. So I think the
But what he's
biggest
saying is if he got 23 plus there was no information, then he doesn't go back.
right.
And if he makes 15, knowing new information, he still goes back. That's the way I took it.
Right. That's probably correct.
Okay.
I feel like most people don't know that it's even possible, right? Unless it comes in to become like a requirement, where like you're not making money and you have to do it. I feel like that's really when most people would do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is that it just feels like you're breaking your word,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you give a word to the seller that, hey, I'm gonna buy your house for $100,000, and then 2 weeks later you come back and you're like, well, now I have to be at
So
80.
you're saying this is why people feel a certain way?
People feel like it's probably breaking a word and giving a bad name to the industry and so on and so forth. Now, what I condemn and what I don't like is getting deals under contract with an intention to renegotiate because you know the number doesn't work from the very beginning. Because that's false premise and that's false hope
Mm-hmm.
to the other party, right? You kind of win the deal over by buying their business. And buying their business means you just give them a high number just so you can lock up that contract and then you go back for the reduction. I condemn that. But if you know that you can give them a number that's going to get you to the end of the transaction and
Mhm.
make that work,
Mm-hmm.
then renegotiating in those instances, especially based on new information, like you said, is absolutely fine.
So we sit in an office very close to one another, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you talk to more sellers than I, by far, right? Because you do a lot of the acquisitions. And part of your conversation with most sellers is talking about people buying their business rather than giving them real numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of instances, you're referring to realtors.
Yeah.
Because for one, I think you have a lot of experience working alongside a lot of realtors, right? And in that experience, is it true that they'll commonly give them a higher number to get the listing, whether it's worth it or not?
Oh yeah. Almost any realtor would go into a showing and agree to list the property for whatever the price the seller wants to list it. If the seller wants to list it for $799, but they know it's worth $700, they will list that property just so they can get the listing because it's a $799,000 listing. And they know, or it's easier for them to just say, "Oh yeah, we'll sell your house let's list it for $799 and see what happens," instead of resetting expectations and explaining why $799 shoots the seller in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you list the property high and you overprice it, then the market doesn't come to see your property. You don't generate excitement. And all you're doing is just you're adding days on market and then you're doing price reductions and you end up selling for less than what the property could have sold for initially. Because if you price it at or a little below market value, like let's say the market value is 700 and you list it at 690, you will generate enough excitement so that the market will bid it up to 700 or more,
Mm-hmm.
right? But now, after price reductions all the way down to 700, people are going to come in lowball you at like 650,
Mm-hmm.
and you're not going to sell your property, and it just wastes time, wastes money because sellers have those holding costs, and then it doesn't accomplish the goal
Mm-hmm.
the way it should accomplish the
I
goal.
would be I would be super nervous. I would be super nervous listing too high because with the experience that we have over the last several years, especially in real estate investing, when we're looking at retail listings or when sellers come to us with their listings, and I see things that are long on market and they've been reduced from the 799 to the 750 to the 710, it starts to get to the point where it's like 83 days on market, 108 days on market. And I feel like the way I feel is very similar to how the public feels, which is like, what's wrong with this house?
Yeah.
Now you have a lemon, right? And if anyone's not familiar with a lemon is a defective vehicle that you get to return
Yep.
and get all your money back, right? So now you have this lemon house that when people are curious and they're in doubt, they're not going to take any action and they're not going to put a bid in.
Right.
So they're sitting back, they're curious, nervous, worried. It's like that's been on the date. There's something wrong with that house. They don't even want to put a bid or probably not even visit it.
I mean, at the end of the day,
And
only
that's
one thing sells properties, and probably anything. It's price. Nothing sells property. It's not, your chandelier. It's not the fact that you have, a nicer looking lawn. It's not the fact that you have nicer double pane windows. It's
Mhm.
the price that you put your
Mhm.
property or your product out there for.
Yeah.
Because if it's priced at or below the market value, whatever the actual market value is, then you'll generate enough activity and enough demand to make that sale happen.
Yeah.
But
I mean, price is the simplest answer. I read an article that said 80 to 90% of homes get sold just because of price.
right.
And the other things are small, influential, like great salespeople and features and all that other stuff. If someone really wants it and their, heartstrings are being pulled on emotionally, that does influence it. But price by far is the number
I
one.
mean, let me ask you this. If there is, let's say there's an economic downturn and everything's just going to shambles, and you have a $5 million mansion in Beverly Hills, right? And you know that the market value, based on comps and the most recent comps, last 3 months, it's $5 million. And you list it for $4 million. Would it sell like that
In a down market?
in a down market?
I think so.
So you can sell anything as long as the price is right.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the easiest and the simplest way to make the sale is just to, price things lower. That's why I kind of like this business, is because everything's based on the deal making sense,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why I don't like people that go into real estate acquisitions and they try to just get contracts without a thought of, is this contract going to go through or not? And they just lock things up just to lock them up for higher than what they really should be locked up.
So,
That's a failing business.
okay. So, based on what we're talking about right now, and we're both licensed real estate agents, and I want you to answer honestly, which I know you will. Realtors are connected with a code of ethics. Real estate agents are aligned with a code of ethics, and it gets enhanced once they become a realtor, right? With an extra layer of a code of ethics. And we're talking about buying people's business and a house worth 700 being listed at 799 just to get that listing, right? So in your opinion, do you think all realtors would do that, or a vast majority of realtors would
Yes,
do that?
vast majority would do that.
So is that unethical?
It's absolutely unethical.
Why?
It's probably the most unethical thing that they can do because they're trying to gain business off of false premise. The premise that they make to the seller is that, sure, I'll take this on and I'll list it for that price, instead of educating the seller and ensuring that the seller is going to go the right route. Because most people, at least in the United States, buy or sell a house maybe once, twice, or 3 times in their lifetime, right? They're not exposed to, hundreds or thousands of transactions that we go through and we see. And they're not exposed to the marketplace and how it operates. So to them, they're like, oh, I'm just going to maximize the amount of money I get for my property by pricing it higher and then potentially negotiating a little bit off of that number. But that's not how the marketplace operates. It operates off of demand, or being able to generate demand for your property. So even though they have an emotional attachment, they're like, well, my house is so much better because it has double pane windows and everybody in the neighborhood has single pane windows. That's not what the market looks at, right? So all those tiny, small little details that the homeowner thinks add value might not add value. And because they have that emotional attachment, they don't see clearly that this house is not worth $799 or even $750. So it's the professional's job who's going to be listing that property, negotiating on behalf of that property, and closing that deal to explain and educate them so that the homeowner understands that pricing it at $700,000 is 10 times more beneficial than pricing it at $800,000, right? Because they don't know the marketplace and they don't know how you should generate demand for your property. And it's the agent's job to explain that. So the other thing that I want to bring up is that I think is unethical is if you're a realtor and you go and come across property that is that has a distressed seller, right? Motivated seller. Somebody who doesn't want to sell, but they need to sell. And you don't have the resources of actually making it happen for that individual within a timely manner so that that person can, for example, avoid a foreclosure
Mm-hmm.
or be able to buy another house because they're going to lose the other property.
Mm-hmm.
And let's say they have 20 days to make that happen. If you just care about getting a commission out of that transaction, you're going to get them under a listing agreement and just go list the property, right? But that, in a lot of cases, puts the seller at a disadvantage because you might, most agents would try to maximize that by giving a seller a slightly higher number and giving them false hope, listing that property, and then generating leads, especially if they don't have qualifications of vetting those buyers, generating buyers who might not even close on that property, right? So it's very important to have uh, you know a link within the marketplace that is able to close transactions like that, because generally speaking, retail real estate agents are not capable of handling cash, have to sell type of transactions because they don't have the know-how, they don't have the expertise, and they don't have the database of that, buyer pool to
Mm-hmm.
make that happen. Now, if you throw it on the MLS, of course you have exposure and you still get cash buyers who would come and find you, but I mean, you're kind of dealing with fire.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't make that happen and you don't have expertise in making that happen and you still take that listing, are you doing a disservice for that seller?
Well, you can be, because to complement what you're talking about, yes, you might get interest and you might get people that want to see it, and some people are going to be capable, perhaps to even close on time, but there's also going to be a lot that are not, right? And you, if you don't have experience with those transactions, you can't risk making a mistake
Right.
and losing everything, because it's not helping you, it's not helping the potential new buyer, and it's especially not helping the seller if you
Right.
don't transact that. So you almost have to know with certainty what's going to happen. You almost got to be ready to go to close, like as fast
Correct.
as humanly possible. You
Correct.
don't list it up with hope that a buyer will come
Correct.
if you only have 20 days,
Correct.
right? So if it did draw excitement and you're getting offers, there, the realtor along with the seller is probably going to be inclined to take the biggest one, but the risk is like, what are those loans, FHA 203K loans, like,
Right.
can those close in time?
No, I mean, there's no way they're closing in 20 days.
Or that you try to close it with a conventional or FHA loan, but it's just in bad shape and things have to be repaired, and there's no extensions after the foreclosure date, right? So there's too much that can go wrong if you don't have that experience.
Right.
The experience has to be getting the right individuals inside, if not yourself, as fast as humanly possible, not standing for any inspection period, if not the shortest one humanly possible, and then vetting whether they truly have the cash or the right resource to close with cash, whether it's a
Correct.
private money lender and a hard money lender. And you should be calling all of those parties to
Right.
vet them and getting bank statements and getting access, because you have to truly know without question that those parties can close, that
Right.
it can go to close, and that you can save it, because you're going to help the seller out the most in that way, even if it's not the highest number, and especially keep that foreclosure off of their record, because there are going to be some cases where the seller might not make any money. They just don't want the foreclosure on their record, because I've been down that road a lot of times where buyers don't even want to pay the amount they owe. They want lower. And I have to voice that the only way this is a transaction is at least if the mortgage gets paid. And you have to talk them up to that as a max. So they're paying amounts higher than they even wanted to. Because most people are going to walk away from that transaction.
Right.
And they do exist. We see them all the time.
Now, one thing that I do want to kind of transition into is, so sellers usually get a certain amount of proceeds within transactions like this, right? And I think one time you do this, or you did this in your sales trainings, where salespeople would ask you, well, why do we have to go and try to renegotiate a transaction lower if we're already making money on a deal like that? And the example you would always give is that, well, if the seller ended up in a situation like that, right, where they messed up their life, they messed up their credit, they're on the brink of foreclosure, they can't make their bills happen. Some of them are drug addicts, right?
We
And
had a recent one.
we had a recent one,
few.
very recent. So the money going into the seller's pocket versus the money going into your pocket, where is that money going to do more good? Is it going to be better off with the seller, who is most likely going to go and mess up their life in the same way they've messed it up now? Or is it going to be better off for you and your team to have that money and grow the organization and be able to help other people to get out of situations like that? Because, people would probably listen to a conversation like this and say that we're evil, but unfortunately for them, we're a necessary evil. Because the economy,
I don't think it's evil.
whatever you want to call it, but the economy needs a link like us who's able to get people out of shitty situations, right? No matter whether we exist or not, those shitty situations are going to exist. And if nobody gets people out of situations like that, the only thing that's going to happen is
the bank wins.
Correct. Not only the bank wins, but I mean, the bank doesn't even win in a situation like that,
because they don't want the
property. Yeah, most banks don't want the property. Most banks don't want foreclosures. So, and maybe it's not even the bank. It's just properties like dilapidated properties in really bad conditions just keep being an eyesore in the neighborhood.
Right.
Versus it going and being renovated and going to a family.
Right.
So I've always admired the fact that the market is able to pull money out of certain people's pockets who don't know how to manage the money and put it in the pocket of other people that do know how to manage money, and they are able to get more money by solving bigger and more problems. So if we're problem solvers and the market rewards us for solving those problems, is it better off for us to have that money versus the seller? And why?
I think that's more of a rhetorical question than a question that needs to be answered, because you answered it inside of that whole spiel. But I mean, that's a question that everyone should ask, because I guarantee you right now, there's two scenarios that are going on as we speak. There's wholesalers that can't get their first deal because it's a very, very difficult industry, no matter how easy these gurus make it seem. There's also wholesalers that are going out of business as we speak, because either the deals that they do get, they either don't make enough money or they fall apart, right? So how do you make up that difference and protect yourself, your family, your company, and either grow your company or feed your employees? And in some cases, you have to renegotiate in order to make money to stay in business, right?
Right.
So are you going to just have to lay off and fire people, or close your business, or not pay your bills? Because there's a scale with all of this that we do. There's transactions that can fall apart and not go through, and there's transactions that have the opportunity to be more fruitful, so that we balance that scale and try to keep everyone happy, especially ourselves, because if we're not happy, we don't want to do this business, and we're not going to want to take people in the business with us.
Right.
So I think that complements a lot of what you're talking about when, where do the ethics lie, really, right?
Who determines the ethics too?
Who determines the ethics, right? So I think everyone determines their own ethics in a way, but there is a scale of unethical and ethical, right? So should you give $20,000 to $50,000 more? So say you have a deal, you negotiated $200,000, didn't even renegotiate, but a buyer bought it for $275,000. I don't know any investor that ever went back and gave an extra 50 to the seller.
Right.
Especially if they were a drug addict and they were just going to throw it all away. because they've ruined their life up to that
Well,
point.
we have an example.
It's tough. You know what I would potentially do? If you really want to help that seller, get involved in their life. Take them to a program. Put 5 to 10 grand into that program.
Pay for their first month's rent.
I don't think you should give that person extra money. It's really not going to help.
Right. True. Well, we have done that just recently. We're giving a seller their first month rent, which was on, I mean, that's on top of what we've pre-negotiated and talked to with that seller, right? So we are giving her an extra check after closing and after everything's said and done, just to help her pay for her first payment at the new place.
Right.
Now, one thing that makes me a little sad and makes me want to reconsider this is when I talk to that seller, she's got like $100,000 or $120,000 out of that transaction, right? And we also stand to make, about $100 or maybe more $1,000 off of that same transaction. But one thing that kind of pissed me off and made me very sad was that seller called me, and she was, in just some emotional state of mind, but she just said, because I reminded her, she was crying. She's like, I have to go into an apartment now and this and that. And I'm like, listen, you lived in a house that needed a lot of repairs, and now you're going into an apartment, which is practically brand new. All of the repairs are going to be taken care of by a corporate landlord. You're not responsible for a single thing, insurance, taxes, nothing. And you're considering this a downsize or a downgrade? And I said, and I reiterated, and I said, on top of that, you're putting over $100,000 in your bank account.
When you need it.
When you need it, just like free money, because she inherited the house, so it didn't even cost her anything. So one thing that she said that pissed me off was, well, it's all going to be spent probably in less than a year anyway. And I'm like, how can you possibly spend $100,000 in less than a year? You're still working and you're still making money. How would you spend all those savings?
I think from the way she talked about her life and her lifestyle, when she has money, she spends it like it's going out of style.
Exactly. Well, she said my daughter's going to get most of it probably. She's going to come in and probably ask for money, and I'm going to give it to her, and she's going to go blow it at the clubs. And I'm like, oh my God, this is what the money is going to fund. So is it better off to get people to get money in the people's hands like that who are just going to blow it? Or is it better off in the hands of companies and organizations who will be spending it on hiring more people, solving more problems, bringing jobs to the economy, and so on?
Yeah, and strengthening the capability to solve those problems.
Right.
Yeah, money solves a lot of problems. So, I mean, this isn't really to enforce people to electively renegotiate deals if you don't want that a part of your business model. But I think it should be talked about. I think it should be discussed. I think it should be reconsidered because I know how tough it is to run and grow a business, right?
Oh, yeah.
I know how tough it is to run and grow a business.
I mean,
and
how
I know
tough?
the importance of taking care of people because I've had 2 relatively large-sized teams, and everyone wants growth and raises and promotions, and almost everyone, right? So we need to develop ways to protect that and to help continue to grow. And best case scenario is like to avoid potentially even risking going out of business, right? And that might be a necessary evil or a way to really protect your interest in the business, in your company.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if I like that necessary evil term. I used it because you just gave it to me 30 minutes ago, but it's not an evil.
I mean,
think
it's not an evil if it's necessary.
Right. I think it's a legit conversation to be had. And it doesn't even have to be hard pressed. There's nothing wrong with asking based on new information, especially vastly new information.
True.
Cool. All right, y'all. Think we're good? You're good?
Yeah.
Cool. Peace out.